Morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar this morning. So first of all, just to acknowledge, I know this is a busy time for everyone, and we really appreciate the time that you've taken out this morning to join us for this webinar. So we're going to talk about some of the outputs from the SWAB project today. So just to say that the SWAB project was fully funded by DAFM, and we sort of gratefully acknowledge that support. So just to mention that from the start. So the purpose of today's webinar is to showcase some of the tools developed from the SWAB project. We do have a second webinar planned, which will showcase some of the underpinning research in some more detail, but the purpose today is really just to showcase these tools that have been developed as part of the SWAB project. So my name is Conor McAloon. I was the project coordinator for the SWAB project, and myself and Anya McInwalsh, who is the PI in the project, just going to say a couple of words to start off with, just to set some of these things into context and give a bit of background in terms of the process that we undertook as part of these producing these research outputs. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the policy background, and I think we have quite a few people joining from the department here this morning. So they'll be much more familiar or very familiar with some of these documents that I've highlighted here in this slide. But just to say, I suppose, you know, from Foodwise 2025, one of the strategies or key objectives within that document was to continue to enhance and support Ireland's animal health status and reputation for producing safe and high quality food. And then in 2017, we had the National Farmed Animal Health Strategy. And I guess the 2017 strategy really highlighted key objectives and enabling infrastructure essentially across all of the themes that we have within SWAB. So surveillance seen as a key enabling infrastructure, and then welfare, antimicrobial use and biosecurity. And then subsequent to that, and more recently and during the latter half of the project, we had the development of specific strategies from the Department of Agriculture across all of these different areas. So again, across the areas of surveillance, of welfare, of antimicrobial use, and then quite recently from biosecurity as well. So I'm going to pass to Anya McInwalsh now to talk a little bit about the process to develop some of the tools that we're going to showcase.
Thank you very much, Conor, and good morning to you all, and thank you very much for joining us. So a distinctive characteristic of the SWAB project, and Conor has outlined the policy context and the policy importance of the research that was undertaken within the project, but also another distinctive strategy or characteristic of the project was its multi-actor approach or transdisciplinary approach. So SWAB employed a direct effort and dedicated particular tasks within it to supporting different actors to come together and scientists from different disciplines to come together to work to create holistic, well-rounded, implementable, practice-ready outputs for practitioners, attempting to deal with the issues and problems surrounding surveillance, welfare, and biosecurity of farmed animals. So there was particular methodologies employed, informed by social science, where we tried to move away from actors or disciplines working within similarly disciplinary silos towards achieving this top layer, where there was integration of the different knowledges, perspectives of the different actors involved. So this is the schematic of how SWAB operationalized the multi-actor approach in practice. So we have the different types of methodological approaches there at the bottom. You know, we had qualitative, quantitative, and participatory methodologies. We had this range of disciplines: sociology, epidemiology, psychology, economics, animal welfare science, human geography. We sought to integrate these different disciplinary knowledges and perspectives, working in these tasks here, numbered 3 to 8. And then furthermore, we had a dedicated platform, T2, their interactions on the right, and T9, task 9, multi-actor co-design, where we directly involved farmers and farmer representatives, agricultural extension, private industry, veterinary professionals, dairy cooperatives, the department and AHI, working together with scientists. So we employed particular strategies, methods, workshops to support that integration of knowledge. So what we are showcasing today, as Conor explained, the outputs of that process, of that multi-actor process, where different knowledges were combined to create practice-ready tools for the field. And as Conor explained, we're going to another event that shows the exact research, the different disciplinary types of research that informed these tools at a later date. So this is just a photo from one of the workshops, and we have some of our participants in the co-design process here today, and they'll be giving their perspectives as we go through the next hour and a half. So essentially, this is just an example of a type of exercise that we used, where we identified hot topics of interest to everybody, and then we combined our various knowledges and ideas for addressing those. So now I'm going to hand back over to Conor, and Conor will introduce the range of speakers who will present the tools. But first, I think we're going to hear a practitioner's perspective to set the scene for this morning. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Anya. Yeah, so I'm going to pass to Tommy Heffron. So Tommy's a veterinary consultant, and I think many will know him well. And Tommy's just going to give us a little bit of perspective to set the rest of this in context. Thanks, Tommy.
So thanks, Conor. I'm just going to make sure people can see my screen. Conor, will you shout at me if this doesn't work this morning?
Yeah.
I'm just going to change the presenter mode. Okay, can you see that?
Perfect. Thanks, Tommy.
Oh, excellent. If anything happens, Conor, just shout at me if my dispatch leads me down. Okay, thanks very much. And especially to Conor and Anya, who've invited me along this morning to set the scene was my task for this morning's meeting. And to quote Stephen Covey, I'm going to start with the end in mind. And I think it's an important question, is why we produce animal protein. And it's an incredibly important macro element in the human diet. And I think it's been an interesting, particularly last 12 months in animal agriculture. And I think there's no doubt we've significant challenges. We're going to talk about some of them this morning. But there's a lot of challenges around perceptions versus science. And I suppose I think one of my last in-person meetings was a SWAB meeting before COVID. And, you know, the One Health message was very strong. And I like this One Health idea because it is about animals, domesticated, wild, our planet and ourselves. You know, we're all sharing this together. And One Health is really about coordinating, communicating and collaborating. And collaboration is absolutely key to get the outcomes that we want to get in a One Health approach. And I suppose I'm a vet, but my veterinary role has changed over the years, but I was a clinician and practitioner, and I got really interested in preventing disease on farm. But I suppose that interest in systems has really fascinated me, and looking at our agriculture systems, and there's a real link between even soil health, animal health and human health. And that's really important in the context of our debate around planetary health and a lot of the subjects we're going to talk about this morning. And a lot of conversations I have about is around our food system. You know, some people think it's bad and getting worse, or is it good and getting great? And I think we've achieved so much, it's good. But like everything, we need to evolve, and we need to react to the environmental challenges and all the challenges we face in animal agriculture. And that starts with mindset. So it's an unusual thing for a vet to be saying, but I have found by focusing on behavior change is probably one of the most dramatic tools I've used, both in practice and outside of it. And I think we have to shift back towards biological optimization, as I'll explain a little bit. But food systems are incredibly complex, and I'm a believer in human ingenuity, and also that in every system there's trade-offs, so you have to be realistic. I'm probably here this morning because I did Nuffield in 2018, and I went off to look at human-cow interactions and how that could improve farm performance. But I think I was very conscious very early on, as I traveled globally, of the perceptions, particularly of animal agriculture. And I remember one meeting, ironically, in an organic vegetable grower's farm in Germany, when we sat at his kitchen table, and he was talking about his children bullied at school because they were farmers. And I thought this is, and that story was echoed throughout my travels. And I said, well, okay, let's start again. I have a blank sheet here. What would I do? What would my answers be? And I've come back to this principle of a biological optimization. So I was looking at dairy cows. What does the dairy cow want? Can we build a better system by understanding her biology and behaviors? And I think that's a good system for farmers in the industry, and something maybe we can sell to consumers. So that was my idea, and I've certainly evolved that since I did my Nuffield, and I've been lucky to work across species. Now, one thing when we talk about challenges, they're complex. Food system is complex, and if we look at some of the subjects we're going to talk about this morning, biosecurity, antibiotics, and welfare. Biosecurity, probably the least sexy of the three, but probably the most important. And if you think about biosecurity, I think I try and always simplify things, maybe oversimplify them, but simple principles. We're trying to improve immunity and reduce infection pressure. But the big challenge is these diseases are invisible. So education is absolutely key here, and multi-stakeholder approach is massive. We've seen the amount of money that was spent on just simple messaging around COVID, hand washing, social distancing. We see globally that, you know, in human infectious diseases, zoonosis make up to 70% of them. We see that avian influenza, unfortunately, is causing problems yet again. It's there. And there's huge cost benefits to good biosecurity. But probably of all the areas of interest, my own opinion would be this requires the most collaboration and probably will be the slowest, but probably, as I said, the most important. Now, I think we must recognize as well the progress we're making. I've been talking about antibiotic reduction for a number of years, and I came up with this 5-step approach. And it started with mindset, actually, because when I started talking about antibiotics first, I recognized that there was fear amongst farmers. You're taking away tools that have been working for years, but it's not about removing antibiotics. It's using them better, I suppose, and using them as much as necessary and as little as possible. But there was a real benefit to having a conversation on why we're actually removing antibiotics and how important and precious they are in both animal and human health. Legislation is absolutely key as well to change, of course, the carrot and the stick. When it comes to antibiotics, I think data is absolutely key. We need to be able to pinpoint down to an animal level where antibiotic usage is. And this is not Big Brother surveillance, but we can really use that data to make better decisions around health initiatives. And then, of course, treatment success. So vets have a key role to play here when we use antibiotics, that they're used correctly. And finally, a focus on prevention over cure. I'd seen that in vet practice for years, where I focused on prevention, the potential of it. So that was my 5 steps to tackling AMR. When we think about animal welfare, as a vet, I think this is probably the most complicated topic, because we have perceptions versus realities. We have a lot of anthropomorphism. We have sometimes a disconnect between consumers and maybe a lack of transparency sometimes. But if you read a lot of studies, and I find it fascinating looking at what's worrying consumers on the dairy side, cow-calf separation is a huge one. If I look on farm, then I think it's, I think from my perspective, there's much bigger challenges than this. I'm not saying that doesn't cause some stress. And then you have the challenge of indoors versus outdoors, extensive versus intensive systems. And there's always trade-offs. But I think for animal welfare, for me, I think we can all aim to improve it, and we all can have a target. And this idea of a life worth living for our farm animals is a good one. It's not just removing negative stimuli, but animals can have positive stimuli as well. And the reality for me around lameness, or around welfare, is lameness is a big one, morbidity is a big one. But one of the things as we strive for efficiency and cheaper food is we have to be wary of the stress we put on biology and behavior of animals within systems. So that's been my take on animal welfare. And a simple thing that I've gone back to, I was very lucky to do cow signals when I was in practice, and I really loved it. It really changed my mindset about how I thought about animals. And it was just these, what is biological and behavior optimization? What does a cow want? And how can we build systems around them then to improve it? Because you do see production increasing, you do see welfare improving, and we have less sick animals. So that's worked for me. And I like collaboration, and I like what SWAB is doing, because in a complex system, you've got to look not just in the silos, but across the whole system. And there's loads of us involved in different areas of the food system. So having different conversations all the way from what consumers are thinking back to the farm is really important. And if we go back to the farm, we think about improving welfare, reducing antibiotics and better biosecurity, well, we improve health. There's no doubt that we do that. We're looking at producing a healthy product. And that's a more profitable system for farmers and our industry. And I think it creates more transparency as well, which is a real big challenge to bring consumers with us. And I think when I look at the key tasks ahead, communication is a key element of that. And I talk about avoiding stress gaps. And so what are stress gaps? But also accepting that there's always trade-offs. Stress gaps for me are when we look at herd and flocks, and we look at maybe biological and behavioral norms, and we stretch them or push them away. That's where we see animals coming under pressure. Be simple things like space, fresh air, simple things. So we just need to look at how we can really reduce the stress gaps on animals. There's a stress gap on farmers as well. If you ever have put cups on a cold winter's morning at 6:30 or been in a lambing shed in the springtime, farming's not easy. And I often say to people, be careful what you wish for, because we must understand the realities of how difficult farming is. And we try and push farmers too far. It creates a stress gap. So I think that's important as well. And the final stress gap I talked about in my Nuffield was looking at The perceptions, or maybe the consumers have, the stories we tell them versus realities. We want to make sure that we're honest about what we're doing. The challenge on communication, of course, is that all debate is now polarized. And we have a lot of vocal minorities tend to get a lot of airtime. But I don't forget about the silent majority. Most people consume animal protein. Most people like what we do on farm, and it's important that we communicate with them. And I think actually farmers have probably one of the biggest roles to play. And I have the dung beetle here because Bruce Thompson did a Nuffield in 2019, and I was talking to him very frequently. He was looking at sustainable parasite control, and particularly the role of the dung beetle in soil health and within the ecosystem, and the effect of pyrethroids and ivermectins on them. And he started this conversation around dung beetles with farmers. And up and down the country, when I went to farmer meetings, farmers were talking about dung beetles and soil health. And that all started with one farmer and one conversation and an idea. So don't be afraid of, or I suppose we shouldn't knock the power of one person and farmers themselves being key to the communication story. And again, this is a really important message for me. Something I've learned the hard way myself in life is perfection is seldom achieved, but progress is really important. And I think we must really recognize some of the successes we've had. If I went back 5 or 6 years ago talking about antibiotic reduction, I got everything good has been taken off us. Now there's a real conversation on farm about the need to reduce antibiotics. So we're making progress, and I think that's an important message. And I think we overestimate sometimes what we can do in a year and underestimate what we can do in a decade. And that's pretty important, because the next decade is probably the most important decade in farming ever, with some of the challenges we face. And with complex systems, many actors, collective approaches and collaboration work. And I commend everybody involved in SWAB and everybody who's involved in the field and research and every chain of our food system who's providing solutions. I won't bore you with my leadership goals, but it's a really important element. And, there's lots of people in the queue of challenges, but there's not as many people willing to step up for solutions. And I think that's, we need to focus on solutions. And again, to end where I started, I think the future of farming is really linking it to human health and the understanding that animal protein is a key macro element in human nutrition. And I'm reminded of a school teacher we had in primary school, a very wise man, and he used to talk about Ixnov and Igesa, swimming against the tide. And it has felt a little bit like that for the last period of time. But don't underestimate the power of education, changing mindset, and the effectiveness of simple messaging. He also told us back then that to have a good pair of shoes and a good mattress, because you'd spend your life in both. I think animal proteins are nutrient dense, they're an incredibly important macro element. And I think everything we do around collaboration, everything SWAB is set up to do, can help us achieve our outputs and outcomes. This is my youngest daughter sitting on the kitchen counter last night because she didn't like Daddy's dinner. I think, look, it's about the future of our planet. And I look at my kids. I want to make sure that they're as healthy as they can be. And animal proteins are a key element of the diet. So I think I congratulate everybody and what they're doing. And fair play to SWAB. And thank you very much for having me along.
Thanks very much, Tommy. That was great. So we'll just move on now to the co-design tools themselves. So just to highlight, I suppose, before we start that, as you'll see, there's quite a range of different formats here, and that sort of reflects the intended audiences and end users. So hopefully that's something that will become apparent then when we start showcasing these tools individually. I'm just going to pass now to Anya Regan to look after the first tool for us.
Thanks, Connor. So I will just share my screen here. Okay, so the first tool that we are presenting is a communication that we developed for the general public. And it was aimed at communicating what good welfare practices look like on Irish dairy farms. So this tool was based on SWAB Task 7, and the tool came from research that we carried out with consumers in Ireland. And that included a survey of almost 1,000 members of the public, as well as 9 in-depth focus groups that we held around the country with members of the public. So from the research, we did find generally very positive perceptions of animal welfare on Irish farms, but at the same time, we also found a perceived lack of knowledge and information amongst the public. So for example, only 20% of those surveyed felt they had enough information on animal welfare friendly food, we also find that the public tend to use a very small and limited number of heuristics or rules of thumb to judge welfare. So for example, they assume that smaller farms have better welfare, or if they are able to see animals in fields, they assume good welfare. So they actually have very little knowledge or information about the specific farm practices, what actually takes place on farms that constitutes good welfare on dairy farms. So this can have the end effect of leaving consumers feeling quite disconnected, and they do struggle then to make sense of food labels and food logos and quality assurance schemes. So we decided to target a video at communicating to the public in very lay-friendly terms what good welfare practices actually look like on Irish dairy farms. So the aim here was really to empower people with the knowledge to make informed choices. So the video itself was co-designed with approximately 15 stakeholders, and that included animal health and welfare scientists, communication specialists, policymakers, and the farming community. So these people all gave very kindly of their time to generate ideas for the tool and to then sense check all the language and imagery that was used. So the video was launched back in May of this year, and through a social media campaign has received quite good engagement online with over 30,000 views of the video and over 200,000 social media impressions. So I will show you the video in full now. It's just under 5 minutes, and the video itself is available on our website. And we would really strongly encourage you to share it through your own mediums, or indeed get in contact with us if you have ideas for its further use. So I'll play the video now.
There are 1.5 million dairy cows in Ireland. Each produces, on average, 5,500 litres of milk per year. A cow is an adult female that's had at least one calf and must give birth annually to produce milk. Cows are sentient animals. They experience emotions and are highly aware of their surroundings, so it's important that they're well cared for. Well cared for cows enjoy a healthier life, producing better quality milk that's also healthier for humans. To have the best quality of life, cows need access to good food, good housing in the winter, and good health under the primary care of farmers. There are just under 18,000 dairy farms in Ireland. The average dairy farm has 90 cows. Dairy farmers are responsible for ensuring their cows are well looked after. They do this by checking on them daily to make sure they're in good health and engaging with normal behaviours and activities. Normal behaviours include grazing on grass, chewing the cud, grooming, and exploring their environment. Each year, the Department for Agriculture, Food and the Marine select a sample of farms for inspection to make sure they're meeting legal requirements, including those for animal health and welfare. Additionally, Irish dairy farmers signed up to the Board BIA Sustainable Dairy Assurance Scheme are inspected every 18 months to confirm they meet the requirements of the standard, which includes animal welfare criteria. Almost all milk produced in Ireland comes from farmers certified under the Board BIA scheme. For most of the year, dairy cows eat grass, but in winter, there's not as much grass available. Instead, farmers give cows silage. In Ireland, this is grass that's been cut and preserved earlier in the year. Farmers give cows additional dry feed like cereals and protein feeds, with added vitamins and minerals so they get enough energy and nutrients. Like humans, different cows have different nutritional needs, so it's important that farmers use nutritionists to make a diet plan for their cows and review it regularly. A single cow can drink anywhere between 50 and 140 litres of water a day. Therefore, it's important the farmer regularly checks the water supply and keeps it clean. Cows are ruminants and have 4-chambered stomachs. After eating, they regurgitate their food and chew it again to make it more easily digested. The half-digested food is called cud. Cows lie down for long periods of time to sleep, rest, or to chew their cud. In Ireland, cows are usually outside on grass from early spring to late autumn, dependent on weather. In winter, dairy farmers generally take the cows inside, where they're given feed and space to move around and lie down in comfort and shelter. To ensure the cows can rest well, there should be at least one cubicle per cow, with enough room to allow the cow to lie down and rise without difficulty. Because cows must kneel to lie down, cubicle bedding for cows should be cushion-like, using mattresses, sawdust, or sand. Cows can develop conditions such as lameness and mastitis, a disease of the udder. Cows are clever at hiding when they're ill. So it's important that farmers know their cows' normal behaviour and what signs to look out for that might show something is wrong. Farmers have specific signs they look out for in cows and use tests and technologies to monitor cows' health. If a farmer discovers a sick animal, they'll call the vet to attend. It's also recommended that every year the farmer develops and puts in place a herd health and welfare programme with a vet. This might include vaccinating against common conditions, dosing programmes for parasites, preventing diseases by practicing good hygiene, especially when milking, and implementing a programme to ensure good calf health.
Okay, so that is the video, and as I mentioned, this video was based in an evidence base of research carried out with consumers, and just some resources there if anybody would like to read a little bit more about the research that we carried out. All of the co-design tools, of course, can be downloaded publicly from the SWAB website as well, and the link is there. So thank you very much to all the research team that were involved in this, and a particular thanks to all the participants and stakeholders who contributed to the research and co-design process.
Great, thanks Anya. I'm going to pass next to Anya McInwalsh, who's going to talk about the tool which was called Farmer Engagement with Animal Health Surveillance and Diagnostic Services.
Thanks very much, Conor. So the tool I'm going to showcase today is in relation, as Conor explained, the factors that influence farmers to submit or otherwise to regional veterinary laboratories. And a particular focus of our research, coming from the sociological discipline, was to conduct case studies with farmers and to understand how the various factors that in the minds of farmers, and on the basis of their own experiences, the factors that influence them to submit a carcass or a sample to an RVL. So we came to understand the social context, the economic context, the geographical context of that influences farmers' decisions to submit or otherwise. And what we found was that there's a whole variety of different types of values and practical factors that ultimately shape farmers to submit samples or carcasses. And on the basis of these interviews, we developed a short animation that's based on farmers' own words that explains why they may submit or otherwise. And it's very important to note, and it reflects in ways what Tommy spoke about earlier, that rather than just pitching a particular message, trying to convince farmers this is the right thing to do from the perspective of a vet or a scientist, we really need to acknowledge sometimes the issues relating to fear, particularly where this topic is concerned, that exist and that play on the minds of farmers in making their decisions. So in this video, and when I play it, I just ask you to be attentive to these types of issues that we attempt to surface and negotiate in the video. We attempt to show different actors' perspectives, the perspective of the farmer, of course, the fears, the issues that arise in his or her mind, and also the other side, which may be the standard issue advice of the RVL, which is there, of course, to preserve and to maintain the integrity of surveillance of farmed animals. So we allow that conversation to go back and forth, and by surfacing the doubts, the practical issues that farmers experience, we allowed that process to negotiate an outcome, and we attempt to address head on rather than ignoring the fears. We attempt to surface those and show them in the video so that farmers who may watch it, and the intended audience is farmers, but also those who are working with farmers, such as advisors and vets. This type of video can be circulated easily on WhatsApp, etc., just to address the issues that arise in the farmer's mind. So, for instance, just so you can be aware of these issues in the video, we acknowledge that farmers, it can be a very difficult time emotionally for farmers when they lose an animal. We also realize that farmers do want to know, they do feel reassured to have an answer if they feel that there is an animal health problem on their farm. We do acknowledge the fact that sometimes the results can be inconclusive. It's really important to acknowledge that to farmers, because otherwise they can use it as a reason not to submit. But if it's dealt with and if it's surfaced and brought to the fore, farmers will feel more comfortable in submitting carcasses. Also, the issue of practicalities, of the time required involved in bringing a carcass or a sample to an RVL, depending on geographical location, the issue of transport. And we also highlight in the video when it's really important for farmers to take action. So those incidents at farm level where it really does require action on the part of the farmer to engage with an RVL. And we also address the central knowledge gap, which we found through the interviews, which is that farmers tend to be not aware that also the RVLs take samples, and echoing what Tommy said earlier, this issue of prevention is better than cure. So I'm just going to show you the video now, and just to remind you that you're very welcome to put questions in the Q&A, and we will either answer them live or, time permitting, or we'll answer them using text.
Sorry I'm late. I needed to take an animal over to the RVL.
Oh no, it's terrible when you lose an animal.
Aye, but it's just part and parcel of it. Sometimes they're just one-off things. Most times you'll know what the problem is, or the vet could tell you.
This was very sudden. Neither the vet nor I knew what caused it, so it's no harm getting it checked out at the RVL. That way I'll know if I have a problem, or if it's something that can be spread from one animal to another.
I had a group of weanlings coughing last year, and one of them died despite the vet being out twice. The vet was very anxious to find out what was causing it, as I was myself. I have the weanlings vaccinated this year now. So far, so good.
I haven't gone to the lab in a long time. It's a lot of hassle. A calf or a ewe is okay, but if it were a bigger animal, it's much harder. It's the difficulty of loading them into a trailer, and the lab is far away. I also heard that they can't always find an explanation for the death. I would have to take time off to drive it over there, and the time to get back.
You're right, Seamus. It all takes up time, especially when you're very busy in the springtime or at the silage. Still, I prefer to know, and if the vet thinks it's worth it, I'm happy to bring them. We're lucky the lab is so close to us. If you get the carcass as soon as possible, we find it's usually worth going.
I agree. Especially if you had a second animal die in a short space of time, or if the vet recommends it. And of course, prevention is better than cure. The RVL also take blood samples from living animals with symptoms, possibly preventing further spread of disease within the herd.
Suppose if I did get a bad outbreak of something and the vet told me that I need to get to the bottom of it to find out, then I would take their advice and do just that. At least we now know and we can deal with it. Peace of mind is a great thing.
Thank you. So that was that particular video, and just to give you an indication of the impact thus far, there have been nearly 14,000 video views and 43,447 impressions, but we have yet to roll this video out through the advisory services and through networks of veterinary professionals. So thank you. I'll hand back over to Conor.
Thanks, Anya. So our next output then is called Good Practice for Dairy Cow and Calf Welfare. I'm going to pass over to Alison Hanlon from ECD and Laura Boyle from Teagasc.
Conor, can I ask, can you see my PowerPoint?
We can, Alison. Thank you.
Brilliant. That's great. Thank you. Let me just get organized. Okay, so our co-design tool was part of task 9 of the SWAB project and was in partnership between Laura Boyle and myself. So in terms of producing this co-design tool, we held a workshop with farmers, farm advisors and vets. And as part, the aim of that workshop was to develop communication material for farmers and farm advisors. Within the workshop, we presented research insights into animal welfare, as well as the SWAB findings. And we conducted a prioritization exercise to identify what should be communicated to farmers in terms of animal welfare and how should it be communicated. During the workshop, participants emphasized that good practices are already implemented on farms. And one of the farmers also suggested that it would be a great benefit to have an SOP or some sort of visual reminder to guide them regarding good practices. And it occurred to us during the workshop that the Farm Animal Welfare Advisory Council in 2021 updated their guidelines on dairy cow welfare. These guidelines are very detailed, and we asked participants whether they use the guidelines, and the response was that they are not widely used. So based on that, we decided that it would be a good idea to develop infographics. And this was very much underpinned by, as Tommy referred to earlier, the aspect of knowledge. We know from animal welfare science that knowledge influences attitudes and behavior. So it can have a very positive effect on good practices. We know from what the farmers were telling us during the workshop that there are many existing good practices on farm, and to be able to demonstrate that. The farmers and farm advisors also referred to the idea of having some sort of SOP or visual reference to remind or guide about these good practices on farm. And then finally, the aspect that the Farm Animal Welfare Advisory Guidelines, whilst very good, very detailed, are not being widely used by those who participated in the workshop. So based on all of those 4 points, we decided to prepare 2 infographics. So in terms of the infographic design, we based the main structure on a set of 4 principles that were created by a European welfare quality consortium. And they are good feeding, good housing, good health, and appropriate behavior. So we modified some of those headings, adapted to our own needs. We then had a design team, mainly Laura and myself, who prioritized and transcribed the FOWC guidelines for the infographics. As part of that design, we wanted to use tailored language and make sure that the tone was appropriate. And we also used a graphic designer to make sure that the infographics were visually appealing. And so to show you the two infographics, so we produced an infographic to illustrate good practice for dairy calf welfare. And at the bottom of the slide, you can see the link to the PDF, which can be downloaded from the Teagasc website. Within each of the 4 principles, we have the prioritized aspects of good feeding, good health, good environment, good farmers and stock persons. We provided a snapshot of findings, the consumer perceptions from one of the SWAB tasks. And you can also see a QR code that was included to provide feedback for anyone that is viewing the infographic. This slide shows the good practice infographic for dairy cow welfare. And again, we used the same structure and transcribed the different prioritized aspects of good practices from the 4 guidelines for good feeding, good health, good environment, good farmers, and good stock persons. Finally, I would like to thank all of those that participated in the workshop, as well as colleagues within the veterinary school who checked the infographics during the development stage, and the graphic designer Melda, who prepared the infographics.
Thanks very much, Alison. So I'm going to introduce the next tool, which is a biosecurity scoring tool for Irish dairy farmers. Hopefully that's showing okay. If it's not, someone can interrupt me. But just to say that I am presenting this obviously from UCD, but just to acknowledge that it was very much a collaborative exercise. So input specifically from Teagasc, from SRUC, from Mental Health Ireland, from NUIG, and from ICBF as well. So just to acknowledge that it's very much a collaborative output. And we've heard this term before, quite a lot today, that prevention is better than the cure. And speaking back to those policy documents we talked about at the start, that's certainly a central theme through the Farm Animal Health Strategy, for example. And I guess that's what we're talking about when we think about biosecurity, is how can we prevent disease transmission between and within farms. So I'm just going to introduce 2 concepts that many of you will be very familiar with in terms of terminology. So we think about biosecurity comprising 2 different aspects. One is bioexclusion, which is obviously preventing disease transmission coming into the herd. And then we also have biocontainment, which is the aspect of preventing disease transmission within herds, often from adult animals to young stock, for example, but not limited to those 2 different categories. So in terms of the supporting research for this, it's important to think about why we might need a biosecurity scoring tool, and why we may need some of the supporting research that was done as part of the SWAB project. And it's been seen from some of the literature that one barrier to adoption of biosecurity practices is a lack of evidence of an economic benefit to the farmer, and in some cases of a benefit in terms of production to the farmer as well. So we carried out 2 pieces of research as part of the SWAB project to address this knowledge gap, and I'm just going to give the headline outputs from these pieces of research. So the first one from Wellington Asawi from NUIG. Specifically, we find that vaccination and testing bulk tank milk for disease were significantly associated with better economic outcomes for dairy farms, so showing an economic benefit associated with the implementation of biosecurity practices. And then more recently, we had a study conducted looking at calf mortality across Irish dairy herds, and mapping this back to data that was captured on biocontainment practices from our Iona's control programme, our Animal Health Ireland Iona's control programme. And what we found was that our study suggested that the implementation of recommended biocontainment practices to control paratuberculosis in IJCP herds was associated with a reduction in calf mortality on the herds that we've looked at. So both of those really shown a good strong basis and evidence for the benefit of the implementation of biosecurity practices on our farms. So with that, then we went ahead with the development of a biosecurity scoring tool, and in a way would help farmers to try to assess their biosecurity practices for themselves, but also to compare themselves with their peers, and then to highlight areas of weakness where they can perhaps focus their efforts. So the SWAB biosecurity scoring tool was developed, and it's important to say that we didn't develop this in isolation. We tried to we didn't reinvent the wheel. We tried to draw on existing tools from other countries, and also from tools that might help us within Ireland. So for example, the AGCP risk assessment tool there has some aspects which overlap broadly with biosecurity as well. So the tool then allows farmers to benchmark their biosecurity practices against peers according to animal introductions, and that's done essentially by linking in with the AIM database and looking at animal introductions into the herd, through bio-exclusion practices, and biocontainment practices, and both of those are captured through a questionnaire which are delivered to the farmer. So looking at those separately, in terms of our animal introductions, just taking an example farm of what this looks like. So the tool then allows a farm to say, to summarize their animal introductions over the past 5 years and to benchmark that across similar herd types. And we think about it across 3 different criteria. So we look at the overall number of purchases, we look at the number of herds purchased from, and we look at something we call the purchased herd risk, which is to do with the riskiness of the herds that animals are sourced from. So essentially, it allows farmers to see where they sit compared with their peers in terms of the risk of their animal introductions. The second aspect then is a management questionnaire. And following the completion of this questionnaire by the farmer, we have an automatically generated summary, which essentially highlights key areas for the farmer to focus in on in terms of bio-exclusion and biocontainment. So in this case, we would say that the practices in this farm might be exposing the herd to a high risk of disease entry. And then we also think about disease spread on the farm, biocontainment, and then herd immunity as well. And we can show these graphically to the farmer as well. So we will we essentially summarize these across 3 important categories in terms of the biocontainment risks. So we think about adult to adult transmission, young stock to young stock or within young stock transmission, and then adult to calf transmission. And we can look at the risk score for a particular farm here, shown in red, against the national average, which would be shown in orange there. And lastly, then we also capture information on the vaccination practices of the herd and highlight any opportunities for improving herd level immunity against common infectious diseases. So that is the biosecurity scoring tool. I am going to pass you back now to Anya McInwalsh, who's going to talk about an extension toolkit to address AHR and AMR.
Thank you very much, Conor. So here we have a tool that's designed for use in the context of agricultural extension by advisors, but also importantly by vets who, in a social sense, many local vets, practicing vets, have quite close relationships with their clients, spend a bit of time on the farm. And in that respect, this tool can be used to enhance the farmer-vet relationship, the sense of mutual understanding between the vet and the farmer, and can also be used by agricultural advisors, and particularly in discussion group contexts, where they bring groups of farmers together to address an important issue and discuss it and troubleshoot it and come up with plans for farmers to take to address that issue. So this particular focus of this extension toolkit, or a toolkit that a vet can use to address issues at farm level. It focuses on antimicrobial resistance and anthelmintic resistance. So it can be used in an agile way to address either of those two issues. It's very important to note, and I'll just say by way of context, this toolbox was co-designed by advisors and by farmers, but it was inspired in the context of the SWAB project by a previous project funded through the Research Stimulus Fund of DAFM. And this is so in a way that the SWAB approach was a legacy of this previous project, which was called Agile Tech. And Agile Tech, which concluded in 2018, involved a very intensive co-design process involving farmers and advisors and other actors. And it really took off within the agricultural advisory services in the sense that parts of it, and it's intended this pack, which I'll go into the detail of in a moment in the context of SWAB, can be used in an agile way. So certain parts that are used can be used as standalone tools or approaches, or the whole methodology can be used. But certainly there were aspects of this particular pack that were used widely in the advisory services. And it was actually on advisors' own initiative that they requested that this methodology be applied to new areas, to different challenges. So one was time management on farms, and the other was in relation to antimicrobial resistance, which in the context of SWAB, then we extended to address AHR also, anthelmintic resistance. So this is just a discussion group and a group of farmers with an advisor using it in practice. And now I'm going to go on to show you the actual tool itself. So I'll just transition over to another screen here because it's an interactive PDF format. So I have to show it in full screen so that we can see the all the functionality of it. So as I said, this began, the format of this and the methodology began in the context of another project funded by the Research Stimulus Fund, and it was proven to be quite successful and then applied in the context of SWAB. So this, there are three main elements really to the methodology. This is an interactive PDF format, so you can click on it to navigate through the document. It can be used on an iPad or any form of device. You can click back. So this is the contents of the pack. This is a physical pack that farm advisors or vets can bring to the farm. But it's also very important to note that aside from these action cards, really everything else could be drawn on a whiteboard or on a piece of flip chart paper, or even on an A3 sheet of paper sitting in the kitchen of a farmer or in wherever the meeting is taking place. So the only essential element, and we found that in practice, that farm advisors in particular, they just carry around the pack of cards that are really important to implement the methodology, but I'll explain that in a moment, the cards. So it is a three-step process where, very importantly, we have this process of goal setting. So what are the goals that can be set on this particular farm in relation to AMR or AHR? What are the particular issues that need to be addressed? And built into this process of goal setting are particular approaches to build the relationship and to increase understanding between the farmer and the farm advisor or the practicing vet. And we know that from sociological research that relationship is very important, because it really does influence the extent to which the vet or the advisor has influence on the farmer's decisions. So how credible does the farmer believe this vet or advisor to be? Investment needs to be made in that relationship. And particularly where advisory services were concerned, it was identified that there was an influx of new advisors into the organization, and that those relationships needed to be strategically built. Otherwise, it would take many years to develop them. So these are targeted exercise to invest in that relationship in quite a subtle way, but informed by social science. So this is the part simply to walk around the farm and to have a conversation about it. Then there's the issue of identifying the goals that this farmer has and the farm in relation to these particular issues. And there are different exercises that the advisor or the veterinary practitioner can take. And then this is where this is either the one-to-one consultation between the vet and the farmer, or one-to-one consultation between the advisor and the farmer, or it's transferable into a discussion group context dealing with an animal health topic. And this is where farmers, and this is where the cards come into play. The contents of the cards, they're essentially prompt cards that the farmer or farmers are prompted to discuss. So some of those issues that maybe farmers mightn't wish to discuss in relation to the topic, some new knowledge in relation to the topic that the farmers may not have. These are used as prompt cards, pre-printed prompt cards that focus the conversation, that channels the conversation, either on the one-to-one conversation or the discussion group concentration, to deal with the difficult issues and the issues that need to be dealt with. But also, it's very important, we have a number of blank cards in the pack, and they can be written on the cards and wiped clean. This was very important to the advisors who were involved in designing the nature of the pack, so that other issues specific to that farm or other issues that the farmer wanted to focus on could be added to the discussion. So essentially the cards are a very, very important tool. The content of the cards was decided by advisors and by vets that really ensure that the conversation targets the right issues. So this is the final point in the proceedings where the farmer or the group of farmers decide, well, these are the types of actions that I can take in response to the issues prompted on the cards to improve matters on my farm, and to improve the sustainability of my farm where these particular issues are concerned. So there is a particular process, and each of the actions benefits and the mode of implementation of the actions decided by the farmer to take on that particular farm has the benefit of the advice of the advisor or the vet. So the methodology incorporates that. And it's important that the selection criteria for the actions on the farm is that they are cost effective in that particular farm, affordable, otherwise it won't be implemented at that particular time, impactful, that there's a benefit, and achievable on the particular farm, considering availability of labour, infrastructure. So we're moving away from a situation where this is what ideally should be done on every farm in Ireland, but what's the starting point viably for this farm to make progress where these particular issues are concerned. So this is where then the actions that are chosen on the farm are staged and timed, and then there is a closing exercise, and this plan is revisited periodically between the vet and the farmer, or with the advisor and the farmer. So this is the contents of the pack. You saw the similar contents relating to grassland management earlier, and this is the very important pack of action cards that are necessary to implement the method. But here on the right, this is also a very important template, which can be simply sketched on a piece of paper if not available in the pre-printed form. And this is the action plan which is ideally hung in a visible place by the farmer. What am I going to do? And it's periodically revisited. What progress has the farmer made to implementing some actions to address these important issues at farm level? So that is that's the end of that particular presentation. Thank you very much. I'll hand you back to Conor.
Thanks, Anya. So I'm going to talk about the next output, which is a milk yield-based syndromic surveillance system for Irish dairy cattle. Again, hopefully this is showing up correctly. Again, just to say, I'm presenting this from ECD, but just to acknowledge again, this quite a collaborative exercise with colleagues from the Department of Agriculture, Teagasc, the vet school in Nantes, the vet school in Nottingham, and also from ICBF as well. So the first question we want to ask is why syndromic surveillance? What's the role that it plays in the context of overall animal health surveillance? So one reason why we might want to implement a syndromic surveillance system is that traditional surveillance relies on testing samples or carcasses generally for known diseases with existing tests by definition almost. For new emerging diseases, no tests exist, or generally in the early stages, there is no tests that exist for that specific emerging disease. and therefore conventional surveillance methods may not be suitable. And so with syndromic surveillance systems, we could complement existing surveillance structures. So it's not there to replace anything, it's really just to add to surveillance structures that already exist. So how might such a system work in Ireland? Well, I guess here we have a lot of data that are collected routinely from our cattle herds, and these could give us an early warning of an exotic disease incursion into the country. So for example, a new emerging disease might result in milk yield depression, which might affect multiple cows and herds in a particular area. So that was really the route that we took with this tool, was to develop clusters of milk yield depression that could be used as an early indicator of an exotic disease incursion into the country. And this is just an example of some of the outputs. And essentially what this is showing is the red lines are essentially alarms that are generated whenever we have a lot of milk yield depressions occurring over a short time frame. So this is a temporal plot showing deviations from expected milk yield. And whenever these drop quite quickly, we end up with an alarm generated, as you can see from the red line. And then we can also look at this spatially as well by looking at hotspots across the country. And here we can also think about different levels of alarm. So plotting darker shades as being more significant drops in milk yield as well. So we developed that system, but we also need to test it. So it's no use having a system there that will flag every week or will never flag at all. So we need to have some way of testing whether this can work or not. And what we did was we used the Schmallenberg incursion of 2012 as a test case. So in 2011, as we'll remember, the Schmallenberg virus emerged in Germany and wasn't identified in Ireland until a lab confirmation in late October of 2012. However, subsequent work from Zavira has shown or suggests that meteorological data suggests that SBV could have entered Ireland in early August. So there was a gap there potentially between whenever the virus could have entered the country versus whenever it was finally detected. So what we did was we applied the model that we developed, this syndromic surveillance tool, to the data from this time period to determine whether alarms would have been generated in this window, in this gap between our likely incursion into the country and our ultimate laboratory detection. And what you can see if we plot these alarm generation out over time, you can see we're getting lots of different alarms generated around the start of September of 2012, corresponding to the time in which we think Schmallenberg had entered the country and was moving around between herds. So just to summarize then, we developed a syndromic surveillance tool in collaboration with DAFM. This tool detects clusters of cases where milk yield is less than expected. And using our test case of SBV in 2012, we have shown that this system would have triggered an alarm between 4 and 6 weeks prior to lab detection in the country.
Hello and welcome. My name is Wellington. In the next few minutes, I'll be describing a very simple tool that can be used to quantify the economic implications of providing higher animal welfare in a typical Irish farm. In this tool, we have different sheets together illustrate the economic implications of increasing space for pigs, as well as provision of enrichment materials. Based on the scientific literature, there is evidence to show that providing pigs with more space, as well as more enrichment material, can support reduction of the incidence of tail biting, as well as reduce stress within pig farms. Therefore, we have designed this tool to quantify the cost implication of doing this. In the sheet, we will see information on the implications on profit per sow, and the required price premium to achieve the same level of profitability relative to the conventional system. And in the input sheets that you will see later on, the yellow feed can be amended. And once changed, the tool automatically calculates the required profit margin as well as the price premium. Before I quickly describe the different scenarios and the assumptions that we have made, I would like to quickly state this disclaimer. And that is that the assumptions that we have made are based on figures that have been reported in the published scientific journal. Therefore, what you will see may differ from what happens in a typical Irish farm. And now to quickly describe the scenarios, we have the first, which is the baseline scenario, which typically means the conventional system, what happens in a typical Irish farm. And the figures there are based on the recently released pig health performance from Teagasc. For this first scenario, we assume that pigs are provided 20% increase in space, as well as enrichment materials. And here we have assumed no change in the production parameters. Of course, that may not be entirely realistic, but that is the minimal assumption that we can make for the first scenario. For the second scenario, we also assume 20% increase in space, as well as provision of enrichment materials. And in these, we assume that the average live weight will rise by about 4% as a result of lesser incidence of tail biting, therefore lesions, as well as better feed conversion rates due to lesser stress. And in the third scenario, we assume that a 20% increase in space, as well as provision of more enrichment materials. In this case, we assume that the average live weight will increase by about 2% as a result of minimal incidence of tail biting and lesions, as well as minimal feed conversion rates. If we look at the input sheet, and as indicated, the yellow feed can be changed. Once changed, the tool automatically calculates the profit margin as well as the required price premium. For this column that looks at the conventional system, these figures are from Teagasc report. And for a typical farmer, we can change the head size and it will automatically calculate the profit margin as well as the required price premium. If we go to the cost sheet, we'll see there that from the conventional system, the average cost of production will be about €1.65. Whereas for the scenarios that we have described and the assumptions that we have made, we'll see higher average production costs across the three different scenarios. So what is the implication of these on profits? In the outcomes sheet, we'll see there that the conventional system achieves higher profits relative to the other scenarios that we have described as a result of the assumptions that we have made. The implication of these is, in order to support animal welfare production, there will be an implication on costs, which can also affect the profit margin. Therefore, to support farmers to improve animal welfare by providing more space and more enrichment materials, farmers will have to receive higher premium. For the case of the first scenario, they will need an additional 16 cents per kilogram dead weight to achieve the same level of profitability as the conventional system. Whereas for the second and the third scenario, and based on the assumptions that we have made, we calculate that they will need an additional 14 cents per kilogram deadweight and 13 cents per kilogram deadweight respectively to achieve the same level of profitability relative to the conventional system. For further information, please consult the reference section where we have included the scientific literature where the figures and the assumptions that we have made are derived from. Thank you so much.
So I'm going to pass now to our panel discussion. So I'm going to ask Mark Gibson to facilitate that. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Conor, and good morning, everybody. It's great to see such interest in today's webinar. We've over 100 participants today, so it's a really great endorsement of the work being done by the SWAB project. If I could invite our panelists to switch on their videos and sound as well. I'm delighted to welcome Damien Barrett from the Department of Agriculture, Alison Burrell from Animal Health Ireland, Sinead Queally, who's an entrepreneur, and John Kelly, who's a dairy farmer. So good morning to all of our panelists. You're very welcome. Just from an advisory perspective, I was very interested in looking at all of the different tools and communication techniques that have been presented this morning. Alison, the Animal Health Ireland have a lot of experience in terms of developing campaigns around animal health and combining different tools. Alison, what's your reaction to the tools that were presented this morning and the practice readiness of them?
Many thanks, Mark. Apologies, first of all, I can't seem to turn on my camera at the minute, but I'll keep trying. Just to say, first of all, congratulations to everybody. I think the tools that have been developed and the work that's been done has been absolutely fantastic. As a health psychologist, I have to stress just how refreshing it is to see that, you know, the tools that have been developed have really come from a social and behavioural science approach. It's great to see funding going into that. Camera there now? Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, we can see you now. That's great.
Good morning, everybody. Yeah, just as I was saying, the value of the social and behavioural science approach when developing these tools, that it really came, you know, from the bottom up, from an on-farm approach. So it was engaging with stakeholders from the very start. And I suppose it really, you know, took into consideration what's realistic and what's relevant to end users. So to people that are actually going to use the tools, I thought that was just incredibly helpful. And as I think everyone would agree, you know, the result now is tools that can be really used on farm, used within the industry. And that it was, you know, the development of them was quite systematic and that it was clearly evidence-based. So even, you know, obviously the social and behavioural scientists that my colleagues have presented, they were certainly, you know, from that background, but even the work that Conor McAloon presented, that there were behaviour change techniques that have been shown through evidence to actually evoke behaviour change, were really used from the start. So yeah, I thought that was fantastic. So congratulations to everybody. And from an AHI perspective, it's certainly something that we're seeing at the moment, that, you know, Anya McNulty, the tool that you had presented at the end there, just the importance of having tools ready for people to be able to use. This is a challenging time for people with new regulations coming in. There's, you know, concern in the industry. There's also optimism. And it's important for practitioners on the ground to have those tools. So just to everybody who's on the call today, I'd really encourage you to think about how these tools can be best disseminated, because they are informed by theory, they are informed by evidence. And, you know, in today's society, we have information coming at us from every single, from everywhere, from social media, from the media. And these are tools that have been shown to work and to evoke behaviour change. So share them in any way you can. And again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Alison. And no, I fully agree. I mean, that next step is so crucial, isn't it? Dissemination of those tools and embedding them in practice and what we do every day. John Kelly, if I could turn to you, John, in terms of like you're dealing with these challenges every day. And what's your reaction to the tools that were demonstrated this morning? Would you see a use for them on your farm or with your what's sometimes called the management team, your vet, your advisor? How would you see those tools fitting in with your system?
Yeah, the tools are very interesting, Mark. All of them seem to be very effective and show a lot of hope that they would work. But as always, trying to get farmers to do it, that's the hard bit. It's a bit like that famous quote, there's no facts, only interpretations. And that's where this SWAB project is really fascinating, that it brings together farmers, advisors and public. And it's quite ambitious to do that, you know. To actually, I think a big positive would be for each of those silos to understand the other, to vets understand the needs of farmers. Farmers aren't a synonymous group either, so that nearly comes down to the individual farmer. And also for farmers to understand the public and what they know about farming and how to interact with them in a beneficial manner for us. Like Tommy was saying there, we're quite, you hear the extremes speaking, but when you communicate with the public and are quite honest and vulnerable and open, they really respond to that. And they really appreciate that. And as farmers, we should appreciate any interaction we have with the public, because it's not their wheelhouse really. They're reaching out to find out about another sector. So that's important. So yeah, it's just if advisors could understand where farmers are coming from, farmers understand where advisors are coming from, understand where the public is coming from, that would be a massive thing. And that's what I would pick up from this project is that they're trying to link all those things together, which is incredibly hard. But yeah, it's very exciting to hear about.
Yeah, no, it is great to see that, you know, look, we're being able to develop these solid insights, and the next step now is really to bring them out at a farm level. But that connection between all of the different actors and support team is so important. So I mean, that is something I know which is an ambition within the next round of the Common Agricultural Policy, is to create better networks and innovation happening across agriculture. Which brings me to you, Damien. You're based in the Department of Agriculture. From your perspective, where would you see these tools fitting, and is there an opportunity there to potentially incorporate these into schemes in the future, do you believe?
Yes, I think there certainly are multiple opportunities here, and just to reiterate what Alison had to say earlier on, well done to all the players in this. This was a very ambitious project, a cross-disciplinary approach, and it brought together a lot of people and from different backgrounds and distilled out a message that's quite important. And I suppose over the years, I come from a veterinary background myself, and where we as vets would often be very focused on one aspect of animal health, say for instance, and animal welfare. But like the thing about it is that the farmers we're dealing with, they have multiple concerns, and I think projects like this highlight that those concerns and make others aware of them. And like I think as well, this issue, if we look at this from a societal level, like farmers are part of society, and they're there providing food to consumers. And I think over the last couple of years, there's a growing disconnect between farmers and consumers, and I think this project could go some way in bridging that gap. And I think that is useful. Now, consumers as well are taxpayers, and the issues like surveillance and welfare and biosecurity they're very important from the point of view of Ireland Inc. in raising awareness of those, that people be aware of the implications of good biosecurity to keep disease out, to keep animals healthy. So I think there are lots of messages here, and it's not for me, it's beyond my pay grade to decide whether these will be incorporated into any schemes in the future, but there certainly would be good reason to do so.
Thanks, Damien. No, I mean, it's such that came through very strong this morning in through all of the presentations, that connection with the consumer. I know from dealing with colleagues in the climate side of the house, there's a lot of work going into that food labeling, and is there an opportunity there to communicate to the consumer through labels, through indices that might at least give some assurance to the consumer. Sinead, you're an entrepreneur. Where do you see the opportunities there for the SME sector to engage here? Are there opportunities to bridge some of the gaps that came through from this morning's discussions?
Hi, thanks, Mark. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, there would be, I would see some risks as well for SMEs, rather than SMEs coming in and actually filling the gaps, and I can explain later as well. Just the work that's been done on the project is just brilliant, particularly Conor, that last surveillance thing with Schmallenberg, and it just showed the potential where you can use several streams of data and information and test that will surveillance and real-time surveillance actually work. And yes, it will. Surveillance, again, previously, Damien, I heard you speak about the soft intelligence that is so valuable to disease surveillance. So talking to farmers and understanding what's actually happening. Again, Alison's your point about the psychological side of this project, just talking to farmers, the social and psychological focus of it is just hugely important. You know, Tommy's piece as well about the farmers, you know, well-being and health. It's not just the animal health. That's all fantastic. But from an SME point of view, previously I was the CEO of a company called Virtual Vet, which was looking at animal health data collection. And I suppose where I'm coming from, Mark, is that while we were able to prove a concept, we weren't able to do it commercially. So actually, I would see a massive role for a team, a funded team. So after this project, great project, brilliant outputs, the cards, everything. But what's going to happen next? Who's going to take this on? So that it doesn't become, and John, you may recognize this as well, because I'm on a farm as well at home here. So it doesn't just become another thing that's posted into the farm kitchen for us then to fill out. And then unfortunately, it may not achieve the impacts that everybody, you know, wants to have achieved. So for it not to be another thing that just comes in for us to fill out, it needs to now, okay, who is driving? A project is finite. Now, who's taking it on? Mm-hmm. Where's the group that's actually going to have the responsibility and the milestones and everything? And who else are they going to work with? Just very, very quickly, Laura, brilliant infographic there as well. And perhaps that infographic actually is also of use to, say, inspectors that come. So perhaps there needs to be a change to the whole quality assurance even aspects and incorporate some of the learnings from this actually into the quality assurance, so that doing one piece of work on farm, you're actually contributing to several policy areas. But long-winded answer, Mark, but SMEs, I don't see a huge opportunity for an SME to come on and solve all these problems. It's just not possible. I would see instead a team developed that will actually look at the existing SMEs and how to work with them.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. So, I mean, from my understanding, what you're saying is a wider framework where, you know, there's actions for multiple organizations, and that the SME sector can take a lead from that, or that there's a almost a chapter there for SMEs, because I mean, any project I've been involved in, you know, where they've successfully got the outputs embedded into organizations or strategy, it is literally getting it into the strategy of an organization. And maybe that could be a further step where there would actually be recommendations for various different organizations that could almost copy and paste into their strategies, because it's all about making it easy, isn't it, for not just people to change, but organizations to change and adopt. John, if I could return to you, you're the end user, as we call it. From your perspective, you know, there's so many different asks on farmers nowadays between climate change, biodiversity, and animal health is of course as important. You know, how do you see yourself in the future managing all of these different challenges? Are there opportunities there for better coordination of all of these different measures?
Yeah, you know, a lot of people do think in silos. A lot of farmers do think just about themselves, and you can just see how vulnerable that can leave you at times. The needs of welfare and animals, like that, can change, and that at the minute, just take calves, dairy calves, for example. That's been driven by consumers and the public. So that's like a total change, and not a total change, but a change in priority of welfare on farm, was something farmers have to respond to. So that's the danger in thinking in silos and not interacting with people enough. I think that's where this project can help. It can maybe give farmers a heads up to what's coming, and sometimes it actually helps farmers realize the importance of welfare, how it affects things outside their farm door. Even though, you know, I send my milk in the lorry, other things affect that, not just the milk price. You know, how I look after calves, how people perceive I look after calves, and just even sharing information across the different sectors and different actors has to be valuable. It makes people are able to make more informed choices as consumers, as farmers, and as vets. So I think this sort of, I don't know, is holistic the right word, but this holistic approach makes it a bit safer for everybody involved, and it will leave us open to less shocks. So it's only a positive thing the more information we share, because in today's world, we're not going to keep anything secret for long. So it's very important that we're quite open with these things.
Thanks, John. No, that very wise words. I mean, that really is, I think, one of the major ambitions of a lot of the work that we're doing at the moment in Teagasc is about bridging those gaps between the different actors in the agri-food ecosystem. And just listening from today's session, I'm already getting ideas on how we could potentially link up with other organizations. One of the programs that we deliver within my department is the Connected program, which is designed for providing training and support to non-farmers. So those services working with farmers, whether it be the financial service sector, the veterinary profession, or indeed private agricultural consultants, and you know, to have that coherency across those groups, and to support those groups then with necessary tools. Teagasc will shortly be launching a new education program for farmers for continuous professional development. I could see already from today some elements of a training course for farmers that it could engage with to become better informed around animal health. We had the pleasure of interviewing Bruce Thompson actually a number of months ago. Really a great example of a farmer who has engaged with all of the different professions working on his farm. So look, I'm going to draw this section to a close. Thank you, Damien, John, and Sinead, and Alison for your excellent contributions. And I'm going to hand back to Conor to close out this morning's proceedings. And once again, congratulations to all of the organisers on an excellent event. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Mark, and thanks very much to all the panelists there. I'm going to pass to Carl Walsh from the Department of Agriculture to close out in a second. But just before I do that, I just want to acknowledge there's maybe only 5 of us here from, presenting these outputs. But that's, there's a huge amount of people responsible and involved in production of these outputs, from the research, underpinning it to the final co-design process. So going from researchers across the different institutions that are not presenting these today, right back to the stakeholders and our stakeholder group that were really fundamental to these outputs. So just to acknowledge that and to thank everyone for their help and involvement. So Carl, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Connor, and good morning, everyone. So for anyone that doesn't know me, I'm Carl Walsh. I'm the head of the research division within the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. And just to start off by thanking everybody for joining the webinar today. As Mark said earlier, there's been a great attendance, so clearly a huge appetite for information in this area. And also a big thanks to the speakers today, from Tommy's presentation, which was really inspiring and thought-provoking at the start, right through to all of the individual research presentations. I think they were really excellent. The SWAB project, of course, was funded, as has been said, by the department back in our 2017 competitive research call. The project was funded almost €800,000. And so just a little bit about the department's role in funding research. So for anyone that's not aware, we fund a broad range of research across agri-food, forestry and bioeconomy. We previously operated 3 research programs covering agriculture, food and forestry, and they were commonly known as Stimulus, Firm and COFORT. But a year or so ago, we've changed our structures, and we now have 5 funding strands that cover thematic research, international research, rapid strategic studies, industry-focused research, and coordination and support activities. A couple of points then on the SWAB project itself. As people have pointed out, the project really was multidisciplinary, involving the 3 research institutions of UCD, Teagasc and NUIG, but also a large number of representatives from across the sector, whether that be colleagues within DAFM, Animal Health Ireland, ICBF and the wider farming community. And I think that was demonstrated very well in the slide that Anya put up at the start of the multi-actor process. That kind of multi and transdisciplinary research is something that we place great importance on in our funding of research. And I think from the presentations today, I think it was clear that it really does facilitate the breadth of research that is conducted in a project like this, and also helps to maximize synergies and learnings between and across disciplines. It's also great to see this meeting of social and behavioral sciences with veterinary and agricultural sciences. I think Alison mentioned that it's very welcome to see funding going into that area of social and behavioral science. That's something that we have been putting more importance on, but I think there's definitely scope to do more in that area. And so using that kind of participatory research that involves this wide range of actors and stakeholders, in this case, to create these tools to then implement the research in operational settings, that is highly novel, and I hope it acts to inspire other projects to consider incorporating that into their design and approach. And it actually also aligns really well with recommendations in the Food Vision 2030 strategy, such as promoting increased collaboration among stakeholders and co-creating, co-designing, demonstrating, testing and learning new ideas in real-world settings. Beyond these aspects of the research approach, I think the SWAB project also addressed a number of other important aspects of the Food Vision 2030 strategy across animal health, animal welfare, antimicrobial resistance, and biosecurity. That strategy highlights the fact that the agri-food sector does operate under this social license of acceptance and approval of the community, and that is increasingly being challenged. So the strategy itself calls out the need for evidence-based data and enhancements to these areas in order to underpin the assertions that are being made around our animal health and welfare credentials. And I think the SWAB project has made an important contribution to those ambitions. That's very welcome, but also it shows a really good alignment between DAFM-funded research and that overarching strategy for the sector in food vision. The project also, I think, has built really important critical mass in this important area of animal welfare and biosecurity. And I'm hopeful that that will enable the researchers involved to go on and apply for further funding from national and European research initiatives. Actually, the team are in a good position here because under the new Horizon Europe Research Funding Programme, 4 new partnerships will be launched over the next 2 years, and DAFM will be contributing funding towards those. One of them is on the area of animal health and animal welfare. And this is an important principle of our funding. It aims to build up capacity and to support early stage researchers so that they can go on and apply for funding elsewhere. So I'd strongly encourage the team to consider those avenues for funding. We'd be hopeful that the call under the Animal Health and Welfare Partnership will launch next year. And also a heads up that we will also hope to launch a new research call later today. It's going to be known as the 2022 Policy and Strategic Studies Research Call. And that contains a number of animal health and welfare topics which will be of interest to this audience. And I hope you don't mind me plugging that. Hopefully it'll be publicised later today. So if you head over to the research section of our webpage, gov.ie/agriculture, you'll get the details there. So just to conclude, I want to thank Conor for coordinating the project, his collaborators in the 2 Áineas, Alison, Laura and Doris, and everyone who has contributed to the project. I just want to commend you on reaching the project objectives and for this very active dissemination that you have conducted and I know is ongoing. It's always heartening for us within DAFM and for my colleagues within the research division that monitor and have oversight of these projects throughout their lifetime to see them coming to a successful conclusion. I think the webinar today has really given a good overview of the really excellent research that has taken place here and its relevance to the broader agri-food sector. So thanks, Conor, and I'll hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Carol. So that concludes our webinar this morning. And again, just to reiterate that thanks to everyone involved in all of the outputs from SWAB and everyone for tuning in today to listen to some of our outputs. So thanks very much.